I figured out what makes an ex realize they love you. Now, it goes without saying that most of the people that are watching this video or reading my articles or listening to my podcast have been broken up with. Their exes kicked them to the curb and said, I don't want you anymore. So why then is it so many of them, statistics are showing, come back? Well, after spending years of research on the topic, interviewing real people who successfully got their exes back, I feel like I've come up with a really legitimate answer for what makes exes realize they love you. And it really is going to revolve around 4 core factors. But before we talk about the 4 core factors, I need to talk to you about something way more important, and that is your ability to subscribe to my YouTube channel. All right, so there are 4 core factors that are present that can make an ex realize they love you. So what are those 4 core factors? Well, let's start from the top. Factor number 1, you've moved on from them. Oftentimes when you get into a relationship with an avoidant, what ends up causing the inevitable breakup is something that you're doing that's triggering their need to protect their independence. Oftentimes you'll see me refer to these as trigger points. You know, sometimes it's moving in together to a new house or getting a new house or simply even dating them or going ring shopping. Anything that makes them fear commitment will cause them to want to protect their independence. So weirdly enough, after they break up with you, they go through what's called the separation elation period, where they're really happy they broke up with you. They're just reveling in their own newfound independence, but that separation elation period doesn't last forever. Eventually, regret and nostalgia begins to kick in. But they only feel regret and nostalgia when they see you moving on to someone else. And I'm betting if you've lived long enough, you've experienced some factor of this at play. How often is it that when you're trying to get an ex back, the wrong ex comes back? Well, this is that at play. You finally moved on. And understanding this concept alone has really caused us to rethink the way we look at specifically a no contact period. Oftentimes when you compare my approach to no contact to some of my peers' approach, they're a little bit more on the side of, hey, look, this is a really cool strategy that can make your ex miss you. While originally that was my intent with the no contact rule, or rather recommending the no contact rule to people, one of the things that I've learned from researching and understanding what's actually working is that the no contact has a lot more benefit if you're using it to move on and outgrow your ex. So if you're doing that, you can have this factor at play. But of course, moving on from an ex isn't the only factor that can help them realize they miss you and love you. The second factor, the commitment categories, can also help us understand how people fall in love. So it goes without saying that generally speaking, you don't commit to something or someone unless you have a feeling or at one point think that you love them. Most human beings make commitment-based decisions on 6 specific criteria: satisfaction, alternatives, investment, scarcity, urgency, fear of loss. And these 6 factors sort of play off of one another. There's a synergistic effect to them. So if you score high in one area, it can actually bolster and benefit the other areas. Think of it like this. The more satisfied you are in a relationship, the more likely your partner is to think, wow, I can't find or think I'll find someone that makes me feel this way more than this one person, which helps bolster your alternatives, which causes them to invest more into you, and it just becomes this very positive momentum building snowball effect. But we're particularly interested in love. What are the commitment factors that help us understand love? And really for that, we need to understand how the 6 commitment factors are divided into specifically 2 categories. You have the factors that affect the person's reasoning. And then of course we have the factors that make them want to commit. Factors that affect reasoning are going to be satisfaction, alternatives, and investment. Factors that make them want to commit right now: scarcity, urgency, and fear of loss. We're only interested in the factors that affect their reasoning. This is what causes them to realize they may still be in love with you. If you're going to really hold my feet to the fire and ask me, Chris, which one of these factors is the most important one? I would say investment. Because what ends up happening is researchers found that the more invested you were into a relationship, the less likely you were to leave that relationship. So this is oftentimes why you see people stuck in marriages that they're incredibly unhappy with and sit there and think, wow, I could find someone else better than the person I'm with. But because they've invested so much into that relationship, they find themselves unable to leave. So ultimately, what you're looking to do is to get your ex to invest time, emotional investment, and money into the relationship. The more they're doing that, the more they're invested into it. They'll have sort of a difficult time leaving you. So the third factor is kind of a fun one to talk about, and that's having them think you are above them on the pedestal. So every single person on this earth that is interested in a relationship has a certain hierarchy when it comes to placing people on pedestals. So you have people that you deem above you on the pedestal. These are people that you admire greatly and think are kind of out of your league. Then you have people that are equal to you on the pedestal. These are people who aren't better than you, but they aren't worse than you, and you're sort of equal to them. And then of course you have people below you on the pedestal. This is people who you don't admire and who you don't think are out of your league. The end goal for all of us when we enter into a dating pool is to find someone that is above us on the pedestal, that we have placed on this pedestal. So oftentimes what happens is the most common relationship pairing that we're seeing is people who are equal on pedestals and people who are above you on the pedestal. If you're trying to figure out how do you make an ex realize that they're still in love with you, well, one of the factors that we find is an ex still needs to think that you are above them on the pedestal. So how do you change that? What happens if you're dating an ex and they think they're above you on a pedestal? How do you shift it to where you can get back above them on their pedestal again? Well, the only thing that's really ever worked for me or my clients is to live for more than your ex. Find something that you care about more than them. Dedicate your life to it. Because what I found is if you do that, usually you're doing something that not only makes you admired from your ex, but makes you admired for other people. And I'll give you a real life example. I greatly admire Lionel Sanders. He's this professional triathlete who used to actually be a drug addict and quit his drug addiction by basically dedicating himself to triathlon. There's something about that discipline and drive, that athletic ability that he has that makes me admire him. And I'm not the only one that admires him. Thousands of others do too. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is if you dedicate your life to something outside of your ex, something greater than yourself, something that will make you admired not only by your ex, but by other people too, that is a pretty surefire way to get placed above your ex on the pedestal, because you'll kind of rise so high in the world that they have no choice but to place you above them on the pedestal. And I think too often people get obsessed with quick results. We live in a quick results industry. How often have you fallen for the YouTube clickbait video like, hey, this is how you can get your ex back in 30 days? I mean, in the past, I've even been guilty of playing on this fear because I am aware that people expect quick results. But the longer I've lived, the more I've seen, the more I've realized that quick results don't yield long results. And that's really what I care about. Most people think when they land on my website or they watch my YouTube channel that they want their exes back, but that's not what they want. They want a long-term committed relationship that they'll be happy in. They may think their ex is the person to provide that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's true. I think given the choice between getting an ex back in a really unhappy and potentially unfaithful relationship versus getting into a relationship that's loving, long-lasting, marriage-based, they'll probably choose that over the ex. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Try to put your life into perspective. Try to put this breakup into perspective. And what you'll do is you'll rise on the pedestal. So factor number 4 is really about letting your ex breathe, specifically if your ex is an avoidant. I'm always trying to inject new ideas into these videos because it really gets boring talking about the same stuff over and over and over again. So my way of remedying this is actually by adding something new to the conversation that I haven't talked about before or I'm not seeing others talk about. And sometimes this causes me to get creative in how I find ideas. So specifically when I was mapping out this video, I decided I was going to go to Google and try to reverse engineer the process. Try to type in the phrase, when did you realize you were in love with someone? I was just kind of curious to see what actual people had to say about this instead of just exes. And it yielded a lot of interesting results, specifically this Reddit thread right here. And that Reddit thread introduced me to this answer. This person, Cats and Naps, says, when you catch yourself thinking about them unintentionally all the time, not intimacy stuff though, you want them to be around for no reason at all. And that resonated with me. So thinking back to my own experience of falling in love, specifically with my wife before I was married, I can't tell you how often I fell victim to this. This is actually a thing. But the mistake I'm seeing a lot of our clients make is they allow their anxious behaviors to ruin this for them. So understanding this from an attachment style perspective, most of our clients tend to be anxious, meaning they're really afraid of being abandoned. Yet what ends up happening in a breakup is their worst fear just came true. They've been abandoned. And so when they do start talking to an ex again, what do? They hold on. They do not allow that avoidant time to breathe, to think about them, to miss them. Instead, they're holding on so tightly because they don't want to be left again. And it just becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. The anxious behaviors trigger the avoidant's need for independence, and what you get is the tighter the anxious person holds on, the more the avoidant just wants to leave. But what if I were to tell you there's one simple strategy that you can employ right now to kind of help fix this? So here's my recommendation. I want you to get used to ending conversations at the high point. So up on your screen right now, I'm gonna put a graphic of what the typical flow of a conversation looks like. And generally speaking, there's 3 distinct points. You have the actual rise to a high point of a conversation, you have the actual high point, and then the inevitable decline to a low point. This is what the average conversation will look like. Now, sometimes the high points aren't very high because your conversations aren't very good. Sometimes they're really high because they're really good. Sometimes there's no high point because the conversation never gets off the ground. The flow of a conversation will look something like this. Now, most people, when they have a rapport building conversation with an ex, they tend to end their conversations right here, right at the end. And this is especially prevalent in long-lasting phone calls. And I'm speaking to my own experience here. I can't tell you how often I would be having a conversation with my wife before we were married. I was afraid to allow the conversation to end a little bit prematurely. And so what would happen? I would allow it to unfold. And so 2.5 hours later, I don't really know what to talk about anymore. I've used up all of my best stuff. And there's a lot of these awkward silences where no one knows what to say. And you want to avoid that happening. Instead, you need to get used to ending the conversation here, right at the high point. See, the important thing is you need to figure out when to locate the high point. My general rule of thumb is when you don't want the conversation to end, when you internally have the thought, I'm enjoying this so much, and sometimes people do this and don't see immediate results and give up because to them it doesn't work. Remember, we've fallen victim to that immediate results idea. This is about creating momentum. This is about you having multiple conversations with an ex, ending conversations at the high point, creating enough of a need for them to focus on you when you leave them alone so that they want to have another conversation with you so you can end the conversation again, which creates more of a need to think about you when they're alone. And it just becomes a very positive, self-fulfilling prophecy. But it hinges on one important factor, and that's your patience. You need to let your ex have time to breathe, to revel in how they felt. And if you are positive with your momentum, you'll find the results tend to be pretty good.